The question I'm asking is philosophy useless? It's been a question asked and answered popularly by Jay recently. I disagree with the specific kind of presuppositionalist paradigm he's coming from, though. That's a topic for another video, but as a result of that view, I think a lot he said was true, but a lot went unsaid. Anyway, having a background in this, I think it's important to add to the picture. My answer is that philosophy is absolutely necessary. Well, what do I think it is? That will help explain. I think it's like an aspect of purification, illumination, and theosis that the fathers were talking about. It's one of the threads running all the way through the spiritual life itself. In fact, all the humanities make up possible threads of that life, insofar as theoria, or seeing God, seeing in small ways too, is a through line of that life. And insofar as many of the humanities are concerned with seeing, history, literature, philosophy, other humanities are not about intellectual seeing as much, but take place as performance, music, dance, or production, architecture, design, sculpture, that are not economically necessary or obviously connected to repentance and the practicalities of spiritual life either. However, what is behind them in their making and what they give ideally is aesthetic experience, or partaking of the aesthetic, which is a kind of seeing or attunement with what is higher, which can be the triune God. So, you could say philosophy is an activity, an attitude, an aspect of discernment, of seeing the logoi, and literature, psychology, history are close in this aim too. The more you take the humanities in a narrow academic sense, the more they are dangerous or useless. The more you trace them back to the nous, the human mind, and its activities in understanding life, the more you see their necessity in the Christian life, and the more you can see the need for them to reflower outside the rigid and bureaucratized academy. The academy presents dangers, but we shouldn't be Philistines. Even the academy should be rethought and refounded. We shouldn't be Philistines even if no one belongs in an ivory tower. So I want to distance myself from everything that you usually think about when you hear the word philosophy. I want to get away from philosophy reduced to its non-Christian history or its academic forms. It is fundamentally neither of those. It is a necessary task that needs to be spelled out. So I'd claim philosophy is seeing when this is oriented toward wisdom, little visions or theoria, big or small. It's in paradigm shift, in the paradigm shift of conversions. So let's look at 3 moments, I guess, of where philosophy shows up, or the philosophical temperament or activity or attitude where it's necessary. So while growing up in the faith, it is an activity of critical appropriation of the faith and life in general so that it's yours. This corresponds to purification, because as illusions are got rid of, you become more holy yourself. You become unalloyed, without false alloys, accretions. This is different from egoist self-focus or any of that. But I'm just saying it's also individuation, because purification isn't just subtraction. Rather, it's becoming whole. The real individual comes through after being distorted or covered over. It's also the building of mental models of the basics in life, like male and female, paradise and wilderness. What is civilization? What is barbarism? That are not just empirical and mechanical models. These are models that everyone uses necessarily. The philosophical ones, everyone uses them necessarily by being alive and living, whether they want to or not. So you might as well do it right and have accurate models. This is the mental understanding level of philosophy which is necessary for the creative act of living your life, writing the story of your life. In other words, making life decisions using discernment. So just as a note, I just addressed two phases, I guess you could say, is purification or individuation is one, and then the next is like having the right mental models to discern, which kind of corresponds to the illumination phase. But I want to mention that finding the right mental model is also finding orthodoxy if you don't start there. And the more that you're lost or you start out separated from the church in your upbringing, the more society is in a state of confusion and disarray, the more this becomes necessary. So I'm kind of drawing on Heidegger when he says that we just kind of exist in this practical flow ordinarily, and that's good and everything. We step back and reflect on things when they start to go wrong, when they break down. Then you need to know what is what to find where the problem is and how to solve it. And so I've found this too. A lot of people who are raised in two-parent households, they haven't had to question things as much. They were able to kind of download a model of how, for example, man and woman relate, and they've never had to question it because it just works. Okay, so resuming. Thirdly, it is in deification itself, because understanding the logoi is needed for the creative act. Creativity is needed to become like God, who is a creator. This is the telos of being human, as opposed to the telos of an angel or animal. See Saints Nemesius of Emesa and Gregory Palamas, who spell this out explicitly. More on that in other videos. But since creativity will be ceaseless, philosophical refinement as its prerequisite will be ceaseless or unending too. There I'm talking about the eschaton. Philosophy is often compartmentalized and construed as a field or subject matter, the positions taken in that field by philosophers. And you have the faculties that correspond to this area. Often when the fathers are talking about philosophy in a negative sense, they're talking about the positions that usually Hellenistic or ancient Greek philosophers took, or they're critiquing the reliance or over-reliance or reduction of man to the faculty of reason, the ania, or they're critiquing the reduction of the world, the cosmos, or cosmos, to the philosophical, natural, but immaterial realm, or immaterial plus material realm, but without the personal as priority. To Orthodox Christians, the cosmos is more than just nature. There's person as well. Now, there's no such thing as person without nature, but personhood or spirituality takes priority for us. I think the fathers are right in these critiques, but they are critiquing historical philosophy reduced to its history. And yes, when you make philosophy priority over theology or revelation, you end up with classical theism, as it was put by Jay in that recent talk. I agree with that. So no, it's not about only the immaterial abstract realm between the spiritual and the material. It's not reliance on reason or even education about the positions taken by Zeno of Elea or what have you. These have a place. These are valuable to an extent, but it is not fundamentally what philosophy is. So also, I'm not just referring to when the fathers are talking about being the bees and gathering the honey from the pagans and the philosophers, or plundering the Egyptians, and we have to, sort the wheat from the chaff. That's good and everything. There are things we can learn there and that are really valuable, but I don't think that's necessary either. And I think they would agree. Even education itself isn't really necessary to the Christian life. You need job training. That's about it. I mean, if you keep going with that logic, you don't need to do anything but be a monastic. Everything else is kind of superfluous. To them, everything point to these people. Now I'm kind of critiquing a certain point of view. To them, everything points to the monastery because they don't see why anything outside of it should exist. They can't explain or justify why anything outside of the walls of a monastery exists. Sorry, that was a repeat. I didn't catch. Obviously, I love monasticism as an Orthodox Christian, but being a fundamentalist, rigorist, literalist, sorry for all these labels, that reduces everything to monasticism and giving only hollow lip service to the value of marriage and civilization is not the way to go. Saint Sophrony spoke of man's necessary creative development in civilization. Yes, he used all those words, maybe not in that exact order. So I still think there is a place for philosophy, and not just that it's the true tradition or another name for Orthodox Christianity. Of course, that's also true, but if you partake in the tradition, then you become philosophical. You incorporate philosophy. Sorry, all you fideist Puritans and neo-Gnostics that hate the world in a sense the fathers never intended, but it's true. St. John of Damascus calls it the science of sciences and the art of arts in Fount of Knowledge. I think he's right. Let's start with philosophy as critical appropriation or individuation or a thread in the purification phase. What you critically appropriate is yours, and you're not just parroting things. Then you've questioned things. That's the critical part, so that you can avoid errors. It's active in the literacy that sees the phronema after reading many of the fathers. This is what Florovsky was talking about and he's right. When you understand things after questioning, you have it. It's more your own. So you're not just parroting things anymore. You're not playing dress up. Questioning things is not necessarily being a bullheaded logic chopper. It's asking genuine and brave questions like, why do we pray? Not because you're challenging people like a teenager, but because you're admitting that you don't fully know. It's part of really knowing what you believe. If you're not just questioned by someone, but challenged by life, you can't just parrot something. You need to know what you believe. You need a spine. If you don't have a solid grasp of these things and why we do things, you will probably be spineless when the time comes and you'll fold. If you end up sticking with these values anyway, it will be just good luck because you won't know why you're doing what you're doing, and even men in places of church authority might be telling you you're wrong. It's best not to rely on good luck. It's not virtuous to rely on external miracles all the time. So I see this as crucial to being a man. But if you don't have time to study, God may have mercy on you and rain manna upon you continually. I'm not joking. That's if you really don't have time. Also, even the ascetic fathers were talking about testing the spirits. And there's Hezekiah, the priest, in the first Philokalia, who's talking about good thoughts. And you also have St. Paul talking about meditating on whatever is good, whatever is noble. So there are good thoughts, and we know there's bad thoughts. And the ascetic fathers have a place for reason in sorting those things out, even prior to being an illumined saint who is literally glowing. Now, this immediately raises the question, what about blind obedience? This is a big thing in our faith. Yes, blind obedience can be good, can be very good. When is blind obedience good? When there are reliable authorities. You can find this in a monastery. If you're not in a monastery, though, because you're not called to be a monk, well, then are we who are in the world, in hierarchies with reliable authorities? Beyond a journeyman plumber who's going to teach you plumbing, the answer is, for the most part, no. I think if you are in a functioning culture somehow, or if you were, well, you can just do what the authorities say and everything will be fine. And that would be a functioning culture. And you can become an authority in that culture much the same way. You can obey and just take the tradition, take what's handed down to you, and then you can become an authority. There will be moments of novelty where you're going to have to think on your feet, of course, but overall it's going to be much more obedience heavy. But what if the basics are lost? What if we aren't in a functional culture anymore? What if a social divide is created which separates us from reliable authority? Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, sure, but what if Caesar is gone and we have de facto anarchy and extreme oligarchy dressed up in a clown show called mainstream politics? Think of the many people, but especially boys, who are raised without fathers, and they soak up the culture and they obey the successful who are today's authorities. And this ends up harming them and others. You can be like Steve Jobs, right? Or you can be a rock star, right? You should be, because they're desirable to women, right? Do we even know who an authority is? I mean, there are officially doctors saying unnatural, anti-natural things. The field of bioethics should disillusion you enough to see that. So shouldn't you wake up from this? Shouldn't you search again for the basics? I mean, I'm also kind of presupposing here that you aren't starting out Orthodox necessarily. A lot of people don't. So in that case, again, blind obedience isn't going to work. You have to find the church first. And I would say these moments where you're lost, where you have to find your way, where suddenly you have to realize things aren't working and you need to find a new solution. This is, in order to solve it, you have to be creative. That's the philosophical attitude that's required for this. Everyone has to make decisions in life. Even monks have to decide to be monks, or nuns to be nuns. And when they decide to do that, that's a philosophical moment. In that moment, they aren't self-focused necessarily, but they become who they are. They individuate. It can be a moment of crisis, for example, where you stand to lose everything that you used to know. Or it can be less high stakes. I would include every Protestant who has converted to Orthodoxy. They had a philosophical moment, even though, in my opinion, that population, Protestants, evangelicals, are the least philosophical people. Usually they're much more practical, but still, when they notice that things aren't working and they have to dig into the history to find the church, to find Orthodoxy, that's a moment of having the philosophical attitude. Do I think that they should be limited to just that moment? I don't think so. Will God probably challenge them again so that they'll have to develop this creativity? Probably, because I think God wants theosis, deification. He wants people to be like him, and he is a creator. And if you become like a creator God, you become like a creator. What is creativity? It's solving a problem, a significant problem, where you don't have a ready-made solution waiting for you. Things aren't just prefab. You're going to have to think, not just pray, because God's not going to write you the answer in the sky. You may have noticed there's a lot of problems in life where you're not going to get some sign. We hear about this in conversion stories, but there are thousands of micro conversions and decisions we have to make in life. To stay Orthodox, for example, you don't hear those stories. You can ask, please God, give me a sign, but nothing comes. Why? Because he wants you to use the faculties he gave you to become an individual, because he created you to be an individual, as an individual, because your life is particular. It's full of particulars that are unique to you. And when you solve that, when you unite the divisions in your own life, you're becoming the unique individual God intended you to be. You're developing the faculties he gave you. It's not a mistake that Sophia and Logos are names of Christ, that these are related to philosophy, part of the wisdom literature in the Old Testament, which was written by authors aware of Greek philosophy. Sophia is in philosophia. After purification, the fathers say you reach illumination, in which you see the logoi, or principles of things, and gain discernment. Now, a good question is, because I haven't found this very clearly in the fathers yet, are these strictly sequentially ordered? What does after mean? Purification has to be completed and then illumination? It would seem not, because purification is a lifelong process, and yet people have within their lives achieved illumination. It would seem ascesis is punctuated by moments of illumination. Now, is ascesis necessarily within the walls of a monastery? What about war conditions? What about economic recessions? Doesn't the austerity we are all entering now afford us ascesis such that if we embrace it and don't run away from it to doom scrolling or games or prawn or drugs, we will have moments of illumination, and we'll need those, and we'll have them despite not being particularly saintly people. It's these moments of illumination that are more micro, that I think are more ordinary than we might think as Orthodox people who've inherited a tradition that is still, after the siege period that Florovsky talks about, in a kind of seed bank form or the bare bones monastic form, before it's taken hold of, critically appropriated, taken into the world, and it flowers into civilization. The siege period, by the way, is a Turkish yoke, then pretty quickly followed by the communist era. And I would say the siege period continues in the neoliberal era. I would say Archbishop Averki and Seraphim Rose are right in their commentary on St. Andrew of Caesarea, his commentary on Revelation and the apocalyptic literature. I think that they're right when they say we're in the women in the wilderness phase, where the church is kind of hidden or has to hide. But anyway, we shouldn't think it is stuck in this seed bank form, this bare bones skeletal form, or else we will be led more and more to think everyone should be a monastic. To me, the church always embraced marriage and civilization, despite it being from the line of Cain, from the fall from paradise. Now, the church embraces the world. The world does not just mean the nexus of the passions. The world also means what was created by God but fell with us. It's not completely bad. It's not something we're supposed to get rid of like we're Gnostics. It's part of the royal calling of Christians to be like kings and bring order to the world. So then you have to engage with the world. That doesn't mean fleeing from the world, although that is the calling of some people, or for some people sometimes. So to me, the church always embraced marriage and civilization, but it preserves revelation and the patristic phronema, and it offers that to us. That's the handing down part of the tradition, but the other part of tradition is receiving it. Reception. It must be recovered. If it's been covered over by lies, it must be received critically, appropriated by us, as Florovsky talks about, not like we're supposed to be parrots. And so we must ask, even if the monastic way of life is in general a higher way than marriage, what is my path? You can't follow Christianity in the abstract without destroying God's creation, because you're also a God-made individual. You're not a human nature in the abstract. Prayer and fasting, for example, are the requirements for just fallen human beings in general, and partaking in the sacraments of Christ. These are what everyone should do, but there are more things that you should do. Not just be a Christian in the abstract. There's no such thing as that, because you're also an individual. So your life is a set of particulars. You must make decisions in that life full of particular situations. That's what discernment is for, to be able to see God's will in the particulars. It isn't just sung to you from the kleros. That would be nice. You have to be able to see it, to hear it. Or as Heraclitus says, what good is experience if you don't know the language? You have to listen to and learn the language of experience. And the words are the logoi. A plumber learns his trade and all the logoi involved in that. If he has a family, he will need to learn more than just plumbing skills to have a functioning family. Dostoevsky is not traditionally considered a philosopher, but in the meaning of the word here, he is. This philosophy stays grounded in contrast to the ivory tower, reflective, conceptual, but it is noetic and reasonable, so it is also not this Philistine kind of anti-intellectualism, this nosomachi, as St. John Damascene calls it. It's one of the heresies he lists, I think number 66, I could be wrong, which is ironically Gnosticism. Nosomachi, which is ironically Gnosticism. These things are, in my opinion, similar to Apollinarianism, the heresy according to which Christ replaces the human mind with a divine mind. No, we think Christ took on a human mind in Orthodoxy, so God's not going to do all the thinking for you, is what that means. And it also means that we're very much not like Zen Buddhists, where you're supposed to listen to koans to hijack and shut down the mind so you just don't use it anymore. But again, I'm not saying we need to use the mind for these abstract puzzles that analytic philosophers are talking about. I'm from that background. It does interest me once in a while. You can enjoy solving puzzles, but it's for enjoyment more so. It's not like a necessary or deep part of life. But if we're going to go to orthodoxy as it's usually described, where we're all kind of being monks, even in the world, and we're reading monks who are talking to monks because we've lost a culture of being in civilization. And the church is giving you the grounds for civilization, but not just giving you a civilization. You have to do it yourself. And it's kind of like God is waiting for that. He's not going to do it for us. And yet we're all waiting. It seems like we're waiting for God to do it for us, or we're content to just be bare bones, which might work for some people. Become a monk or a nun if that's your calling, but it's not most people's calling. So philosophy is especially crucial in moments where you don't have authorities to rely on. The importance of this kind of philosophy, of becoming more reflective, this kind of philosophy fluctuates depending on the age that we're in. If we were in a functioning society and culture, it wouldn't be that important, but I think it is very important now. And Proverbs or Wisdom of Solomon and the wisdom literature in the Old Testament and Dostoevsky is better to read than, like modern so-called philosophers. And also I'm saying it's an attitude of the mind and precondition to face significant and novel challenges in life, to be able to solve problems and be creative and thus be like God, who is a creator. The sciences, the humanities, the principles, or knowing about the principles and nature, these are important to understand, even in a kind of intellectual sense, because there are constraints to a problem. You can't just wing things totally. You need some understanding of general principles and the particulars in the case in order to find a solution, in order to even see the problem or formulate a problem. I'm not saying you need to learn about these in an academic setting. For example, again, the plumber who has a family. To have a functioning family, not just a functioning water system, he has to have a proper understanding of man and woman. That's the first divide of 5 divides in the natural world, in the cosmos, that St. Maximus talks about. That man was supposed to unite, and Christ then did that for us so that we can then imitate him. Again, through ascesis and the sacraments. But if we look at that in our own lives with internet dating, you need to understand what man is supposed to be like and what woman is supposed to be like. You need kind of a general understanding, and you also can't be too rigid and archetypal with that, because nobody is really an archetype or can be. And like I said, there aren't just clearly reliable authorities on this topic of man and woman and how they should relate. There are many, especially in the particular situations they are now, there are many competing authorities or experts so-called, and many are telling dangerous lies, whether that's blue pill, naive optimism, excess trust, or the red pill, excess suspicion and pessimism. Or you could say blue pill is more what's called simping. So, that's also feminism, which goes pretty far back for some of us. It goes to like great grandparents for some of us believing feminist stuff, or even just maybe grandparents believing feminist stuff. So when you see the principles of things, philosophy as seeing the logoi, and you see the particular facts of your life, then you can solve life problems with discernment, and then it's creative. This creativity makes you like the Creator, the Trinity. So it's in theosis as a kind of continual precondition. Or you could say that bringing or keeping order is taking this royal position, and that is the philosopher king men are called to be. We need to go back to the basics and restart. Civilization needs to be rebuilt from solid ground, the church. But we can't do that by turning our minds off and not engaging thoughtfully with life and the faith to some degree. This can happen outside the academy. So the field encompasses more and less than what we usually think. And the nous is involved, not just reason, because I'm really talking about an existential vision of what life should be, but also in your particular life. It can be a moment of crisis. It can be smaller, like creativity as part of your career, although that's becoming more and more rare because, in my opinion, society is becoming more and more anti-human and excluding the possibility of creativity. So theosis is becoming like God. God is a creator, So becoming like God involves creativity. What is creativity? The discovering and formulating of significant problems and solving them, precisely when the answer is not pre-given. And that's most of the time. In order to formulate the problem correctly, you need an understanding of the logoi, or principles in life. This understanding can be called philosophical. In order to see the logoi, you need to become your true self and purify yourself. So you need to thoughtfully engage with the faith and receive it correctly, since it's found in the tradition, in the faith, which needs to be received and integrated, not in a servile, thoughtless, and uncritical way. You can't just play dress up or read a script over and over mechanically. This integration and individuation in the faith is philosophical. It's making it your own. Really, you can see purification is also already creative, since it's always a particular individual repenting of particular weaknesses, and he needs to see for himself why he's going to be Christian and die on that hill if necessary. Finding your right relation to Christ is a solution to the particular problems of your sinful self found over time in a creative process. Of course, a spiritual father should aid in that co-authoring, co-sculpting process, in which cuts should be made here and additions there. This carving of a real man out of a sinful fallen block is creative. There is an art of noetic war as well, an art of war. Any understanding of that order in purification or illumination or perfection is philosophical. And then the order that then emanates from wisdom through him into the world will be creative as well. As the conduit and lover of wisdom, he has philia, so philosophia. He will be a philosopher king.